Welcome to Dayton Superior's Learning Center. This session, we will discuss the use and application of light forming products. And once again, thank you for your time. This presentation is intended for training purposes only. For technical specifications and products mentioned in this training, refer back to www.daytonsuperior.com. Plastic concrete. Plastic concrete is typically a flowable material made of just mixed concrete before it begins to harden. It acts like a fluid or a plastic material. It can be molded in almost into any shape, and typically it is molded into with concrete formwork. The formwork is the mold of the system. As in all products here that we manufacture at Dayton Superior, there is the safety factor involved with it. Concrete formwork products have a safety factor of 2-to-1, which means if you take the ultimate load or the failure mode of that product and divide it by 2, you will come up with the safe working load of that product. We'll talk about formwork, building forms using sticks and boards, snap tie system, Jahn system, the Sure-Lock Tie system, and the other systems available in this training. First, let's talk about sticks and boards or light forming. Primarily use the Dayton Superior products such as snap ties, tie wedges, Jahn clamps, omni wedges, etc. This form is built on site using typically 3/4-inch plywood and standard dressed lumber, 2x material. In the cross-section view of this system here, you can see we have our plywood sheeting in place here with a stud behind it, which is a vertical wood member, followed by a whaler, double whaler behind it, and then an omni wedge holding the snap tie in place. And that omni wedge is also taking up any slack in the system to tighten it up. Now, the snap tie that's holding the system together comes in 2 varieties. We have a standard cone snap tie, which has a cone on it, which is typically used on areas that are going to be exposed. That way they can patch the hole and rub it down. We also have a washer snap tie, which is typically used for below grade. I say typically, but a lot of this all has to do with contractor preference. Walers and Strongbacks. You're going to hear terms of Walers, Strongbacks, studs, etc. today. Just remember, typically in the formwork, when you're using snap ties and wood forming, anything that you have a vertical board against the plywood sheeting is known as a stud. A whaler is a horizontal reinforcement member behind the plywood. And a strongback is a vertical component that is sitting behind the whaler. So if your whaler is against the plywood, then the strongback would be sitting behind it. Diagram here shows here this drawing on the right-hand side. On the right-hand side typically shows a whaler and strongback system. The drawing on the left-hand side here shows a stud and whale system. Realistically, there is no difference in material based off of strength of the direction of the material. What comes into play here, though, is the plywood, whether it's sitting in the strong or weak direction. So therefore, it is the contractor preference how they want to arrange their formwork. The snap tie typically is a hex-headed snap tie. Typically has a hot forged hexagonal head at the end of the tie. The head is actually forged so that you can use the socket to actually remove it, like a 5-point socket wrench. The breakback of the tie, which every tie has, is a part of the tie that is actually set, has a little nick in the wire, so that when you put this tie in stress, it will snap off at that breakback point. And the breakback point typically is 1 inch inside the wall dimension. So you have a standard wall dimension. Your breakback is typically going to be 1 inch. It can also be 1.25 inches, 1.5 inches, and 2 inch. I recommend anything over 1 inch breakback that you must use the cone on it to get the tie to break back. Concrete likes to adhere to steel. So if that's the case, then you have more unprotected steel that's going to be contact with the, especially in the breakback area, will be in contact with straight concrete. It sometimes gets a little difficult to break back the tie. The other dimension you're going to have here is the end dimension. Now here, we're drawing on the bottom of the page here, we are showing a short end snap tie because it is using a piece of plywood sheeting and a single 2x4. And here we have the Jahn A bracket showing here in the diagram. You can also have two 2x4 whalers, one above the tie and one below the tie, and you can use a tie wedge also in that location. The snap tie also comes in 2 different grades of, besides being cone and washer, you can also get a standard duty, which has a 2,250 pound load rating, or a heavy duty tie, which has a 3,350 pound load rating. Calculating what tie lengths you have to have. Well, typically we have two tie lengths that are standard. We have a short end and a long end. Typically what you calculate, a short end tie will typically have a 3/4 inch plywood and a single 2x piece of lumber behind it, or a single whaler. That would then have a tie wedge up against that. So that would be a short end. That is a 4 3/4 inch end. Or we can have, if you're using a Strongback and whaler, or a stud and whaler system, you would need a long end snap tie, which would then you'd have a 3/4 inch plywood, a 3.5 inch piece of lumber against that sheeting, and then another 3.5 inch member perpendicular to the member in front of it. And then you always have roughly a 1/2 inch of take up on the back side of the snap tie. And that is usually taken up with the tie wedge. It's basically, as you can see, basically in the shape of a wedge. So when you apply the pressure on it, you can basically tighten it right up. Once you get it into a snug position, you don't want to over tighten it. You want to get it into a snug position, and then there's nail holes provided. You want to nail it into place to actually hold it there. As you can see with the tie wedge right here, one of the big things that we like to promote here at Dayton Superior is because we are a little bit different than the other guys in the industry. We round all of our edges on where our tie actually comes in contact with the snap tie. Reason being is this helps ensure that the tie will not get sheared off or cut by the tie wedge when you're putting it in place. We like to think that as a safety feature, it kind of also helps to reduce any premature tie breakage. The Jahn forming system. The Jahn forming system typically uses a snap tie system. Usually a short end snap tie. For the majority of the ties will be short end because it's going to be a single 2x4 running in a whaler position. Typically, how you actually start out here is you have your plywood already drilled with the holes in it. You're going to run the tie through with the short end tie through it. They're going to hook the Jahn A bracket to the end of that tie. The Jahn bracket here is typically used when you use a short end tie. Where you are going to put strongbacks with this system, you need to have a long end tie in place here because you're going to have a strongback attached to the system also. So about every 8 feet or so, you're going to have a row or a column of 8 or 8¼ inch end snap ties. Here's a Jahn A bracket. This basically slides in. As you can see, the tie will actually get cradled right into the bracket right there. Once it gets put in place, that eccentric will spin around and gravity will take over and actually engage that with the head of the snap tie. So that eccentric piece on the end here will actually takes the place of the wedge. So you don't have to have that tie wedge to actually tie it up. The eccentric actually replaces that. If you're using a strongback on it, because the Jahn A bracket will not work, we can actually go to the Jahn C bracket here, which will actually straddle the double 2x material that you're putting on there and uses the same eccentric to actually use gravity to help anchor it into position. So it is a good quality product. Typically, always remember that with the Jahn system, it's only used as a light duty system. So it's only a 2,250 pound system. And that by far, this is one of the fastest systems in the marketplace for forming with snap ties. But the biggest drawback you have is you can only pour concrete so fast because you're limited as to the size of the snap tie. In prepping any of the wood for snap tie, you can typically stack drill. Stack drill is just what it sounds like. You're going to have your plywood stacked up in a pile and you are going to drill a hole right down through it. Because the hole pattern is typically repetitive, you're going to actually drill all the plywood with the same hole patterns on it here, and then be able to match those tie holes up with where you're going to have a tie in place. Ties go in place here. Once the whalers go in place, you're going to have to, where the 2x4 whalers are going to be butt jointed together, you can actually use a spreader board across the splice area. I would recommend carrying it to about two clamps on both the left and right side of the splice. Or you can actually butt the joints together right over the top of a bracket. Corners are typically formed up using a Jahn corner bracket. This basically connects to the lumber as shown here, with one piece protruding out past the side. The bracket actually connects to that by nailing it in place with a 6-penny nail. And then tighten down the wedge to hold everything in tight. Strongbacks typically get put in, as I said before, about every 8 foot on center. You would use the long end snap tie to take over for that. And then you would actually brace or align the systems. Bracing is typically another facet of the business, which is typically a responsibility of the contractor. But we actually provide alignment brackets here, which are our turnbuckles. Typically, we'll give you 3 inches of adjustment in or out. Typically, where you're going to have Walers in place, you can use the bent plate because that will attach to the Waler board. If you have studs or strongbacks, you can use the flat plate because that will attach to the flat plate, or the flat plate will attach to the vertical member, either the stud or the strongback. On the back side here, you have a 1.5 by 1.5 angle iron with nail holes in it, so you can actually extend a 2x4 into it for whatever length you need for the site, and actually nail that into a nail stake driven into the ground for an anchoring point. Other systems that are available, we have the A55 Sure-Lock Tie. The Sure-Lock Tie is a self-centering 1x1 cone. Typically, you're going to drill a hole of 11/16, and what will happen is the tie will actually come up to the hole. The loop will actually go through the hole. The cone then will basically self-center on that, as you can see, because of these bridges on the cone. So it is now self-centering. There is a standard 1-inch breakback, and this is only available with a 1-inch breakback. But you'll see this tie here sticks through. It has the loops that sticks through the plywood, and you will make the connection with the Sure-Lock bracket. Now the Sure-Lock bracket has a hook, and right in here, that hook will actually hook into the loop of the tie, and as you pull that, turn it towards the plywood, you will engage the hook. And the hook itself is actually beveled so that it will take up any slack. You would put your 2x4 in this position up here. So your 2x4 will go into this area here. And you will draw that up tight against your woodwork. Should you have to add a strongback to this system, you take this little hook right here and you hook it right over the edge right here, and this one from the other side. And then your 2x4 will slide right up in the center of that. You have a wedge here on a handle that you will be able to pull down to actually draw it up tight so that you take any slack out of the system, so everything is in tension. The other option we have, we can go with spreader cleats. You see this system on a lot of projects where they use a post-tensioned or pre-stressed floor slab. Typically, where they're using a floor slab as their foundation, what will happen is they will pour a small, what we'll call a knee wall, a short wall, on the edge of their slab, which will basically have their sill plate sitting on top of it. Typically, these little knee walls are anywhere from 12 to 18 to 24 inches high, depending on what the use in the application or what part of the country you're from. This system here the spreader cleat on the bottom side here, as you can see within this formwork here, will stay in place. The top one will be removed and probably reused on the next house on the bottom. Typically, you order a standard wall thickness. The wall thickness is preset, and you have a couple of different lumber options. You can either go 3/4 inch lumber for 3/4 inch plywood, or you can use a inch and an eighth plywood, or inch and an eighth plywood. And what typically, excuse me, inch and a quarter plywood. Basically, what that's going to do is they should give you a tieless system, so you have no ties whatsoever. The one drawback with this system here is that this little hook right here will be exposed on the outside of the house. So typically that would be buried in under the ground someplace. The other system you have here is a pencil rod system. Pencil rod is basically a straight piece of wire, 0.225 wire, 1/4 inch wire, that you would actually send through the form, send through your Strongback and Walers on the backside, and run it through a rod clamp. Typically going to be a D12 or D12S, or it could be a D12F, which is spring loaded. But the D12 and the D12S typically are pressure held in place by that bolt that puts in place. So once you tighten down on the pencil rod with that bolt, that locks the tie into place. Once you have that tightened right up, you bend the wire up at a 90-degree angle. Go to the other side of the wall system here. Now, the one drawback with this system is you will have to install a spreader cleat to actually put a definitive wall dimension in. So when you draw the wire up tight with the rod clamp and the rod tightening wrench, you're going to push against that spreader cleat. So the wall will be set at a select thickness or select width. Once again, you're going to put the rod clamp in place here. Then you're going to put a pencil rod tightening wrench on top of D14. And this typically will go and it will grip the wire. And what it is as you spin it, it will elongate, it'll stretch open. Now, because it's anchored in the backside, it's going to actually push everything forward towards that wall dimension. So once you have it up against your spreader cleat that's already used for your determining your wall thickness, you tighten down the rod clamp. This is where a lot of people like the D12F because they do not have to tighten anything down. This is as the rod is pushed through this system here, as spring loaded will actually grab a hold of the wire and be tight. Once you actually achieve your wall thickness and everything is tightened down, you remove the tightening wrench from this system and bend the wire up at a 90-degree angle again. It's imperative that you bend the 90-degree angle, otherwise if there's any slippage in the wire, it can slide right off of that. That bend actually helps lock everything into place. The other drawback with this system is we are only talking at 1,125 pounds safe working load. So it's roughly half the strength of that of a standard snap tie. So if you had a snap tie spaced at every 2 foot on center, if you're using pencil rod, you're going to have to put this pencil rod in at every foot on center just to accommodate the same load capacity. We've shown you here, we got a system selection as far as what system works best for what market conditions we have here. This is not etched in stone. This is just something that we've thrown together that shows where a product could be used or where it can be used. built-in brake backs. You got with your snap tie, your Jahn system, and your Sure-Lock system. You can see commercial use system. Everything runs through here with snap ties, Jahn, Sure-Lock ties. Residential, you see all the systems being used across the board in the residential market. Labor savings for application are typically the spreader cleat, which is very easy and quick, the Sure-Lock tie, which is one of the fastest systems in the market, along with the Jahn system, which is the fastest system in the marketplace. Strippability, obviously, the three component pieces here are very, very well. Battered walls, typically you've got everything from any of the tie systems based off of what's available. You have to just use different tie dimensional ties to do a battered wall, which means there's also some better systems out there for doing battered walls. And we'll talk about those in other areas, other classes that we'll have in the future. If you should have any questions, please feel free to contact me at training@DaytonSuperior.com. And I'd like to thank you for your time, and stay safe, everyone.